Hello my quilting friends! In this video we are going to talk about the borders, and I'm going to select and sew. We're going to place our blocks in the corners by selecting a design and placing it like a block. And I'm going to do number 2. So it's block 2 is the design that I'm using in the border corners. So I just tap on that and tap open. Okay, so I have lots of different ways that I can place this. My favorite is still that 4 points and stretch. So that way, if I have a little bit of distortion in that space, it's going to stretch it so it fits and fills the space nicely. So now I'm going to roll my machine over, and as you can see, I have switched to the ruler foot just because it's a little bit easier to describe what I'm doing. I'm going to line up so that the edges of the ruler foot are in line with the edges of that green square printed on my fabric panel. I'm going to tap that first node, and you can see it's going to pop over here because it's on the far right side of the quilt. Now I'm going to roll over and position my foot in the next corner. That looks good. Tap on that corresponding node and then roll over to this corner. And just take your time with this placement. This is what guides the design. This is how you know how it's going to be placed. Okay, so that's exactly how I want that placed. I'm just going to tap quilt. So we reach the next screen, and again, let's go over our settings. I pretty much set these settings and do not change them from design to design. I like my sewing speed on slow. I like a tie off stitch count of 2, and I like a micro stitch versus a back and forth. That's just my personal preference. I have both automatic bobbin pull and pause at trim lines checked, and I am stitching at 15 stitches per inch. Nice small stitches. Okay, let's pull our bobbin by tapping on the pull bobbin button. This is going to move the machine over, and I've already had it selected so that I don't get the warnings. I'm pretty much sure that my needle's always going to be up and not going to get me in trouble, but if you need those warnings, definitely keep those in place. Okay, so I tugged on my top thread, brought my bobbin thread up to the surface, and now I can just tap sew. So I'm going to tap on pantograph because we want a continuous line design, and I'm going to change this total width to 70.5. Then I'm going to change the total height to 5 inches. So there we go. That is the space that we're working in. So now I'm going to select pattern, go into continuous line, and dial down to pattern A. Hit open. And as you can see, this loads in only one design, which is massive. So we want to keep adding until these look good. And it really is entirely up to you how many you want to place. I look at 8 across that space. So this is what looks good to me. Again, my settings are 70.5 for the total width. My total height is 5. The pattern width, it comes from the number of patterns divided by the total width. So that is calculated by the software to be 8.812. And then my pattern height is again 5. So this looks good. I'm very happy with it. I'm going to hit place as single pattern. So on this screen, we work our placement. And I'll be honest, I don't like the 4 points placement method for borders. I just find it a little harder to place it exactly where I want it without it accidentally getting wider than I wanted. And then I'm also going to be stitching some straight lines in this border too, so it might actually be hard to use the 4 points method accurately. So instead, I'm going to dial up to 2 points, and I'm going to have this mark out on the start point and end point, meaning all I need to do is figure out the midpoint of the border, and that's going to be my start point over here, and the midpoint of the border on this side, and that's going to be my end point. I'm going to line it up so that my needle is right on the edge between the green block, the green square, and the orange border, lining up right with that mark. And I'm going to tap that first node, and we're going to wheel all the way over to the other side. And I've already measured and marked this point here. You can see that is the exact midpoint and the height of this border. So it measures 3¼ inches from the bottom, 3¼ inches from the top. That's where that's placed. Line up my foot, my needle exactly with that spot, and I tap that node. So I have the pattern placed, but what if I'm worried that it's not straight? Something's up with the quilt and I've just placed it and it's going to be diagonal in some glaring way. Well, make sure that all these little check boxes are checked so that you can show grid, show pattern size, and show placement nodes. They're really, really helpful to see the grid specifically. Then you can use these buttons at the top to zoom in so that you can see that design closer up on the screen in relation to the grid. Okay, I'm happy with this. I think it looks good. I'm ready to go. So I'm gonna hit quilt and we're gonna start stitching out this border. And this is definitely going to be a time at this point to stop and check your bobbin. Do not start stitching a long border like this and without a full bobbin in your bobbin case, because it just adds a whole nother element when you have to do a repair pattern and fix it. And I already know my bobbin's running a little bit low. So I'm going to change that out real quick and then we'll start stitching. Don't forget to pull your machine over to the side to do a little bit of a tension test every time you change your bobbin or your thread. So again, I'm going to hit pull bobbin to pull the bobbin thread up to the surface. You might wonder why I bother doing that and why I emphasize it so much. It's mostly because when you leave the bobbin thread on the back of the quilt, it can get stitched over and become a big nasty wadded up mess on the back of the quilt. It's not all that pretty. So this is one of those things I think is really important, to always pull your bobbin thread up to the surface. So now that both of those thread tails are in my hand, ready to go, I'm going to hit sew. And this is going to take a little while to stitch out. And I have had some questions from my students and customers over the years, and that is, at what point can you walk away from the frame? I don't think it's a good idea. I think you should at least stay in the room with the machine running, with it stitching out something this long. You want to keep your eyes on it. As you're stitching, you want to make sure that the design is staying straight. If you need to make a little small adjustment as you go, you can. And then just in general, you don't want to walk away from especially a Qunique long arm, because there isn't any sort of alert or beepy noise or anything like that if you run out of thread or something breaks. You won't know until you walk back in the room and the machine's on one end and your stitching stops somewhere in the middle. So I think in general, this is going to be something you want to just hang out and monitor it. If you have another machine, I have an embroidery machine in here, I might go stitch some embroidery while this runs out. But yeah, it takes a little while, but it's one of those things that it's kind of fun to watch it and just let it stitch out and take its time, and you can enjoy maybe doing some piecing in the corner, and that'll work out great. So the longer borders are complete. I took the quilt off of the frame, trimmed it up a little bit, and I have reinstalled it in the frame, so now I can quilt the shorter border. And the very first step is to measure this length again, so that way we know how much space we're working in and what we need to design with. And this measures 40¼ from the green squares in the corners. So I have 40¼ in length. And remember the height, I like that design to be nicely centered in that border and a little bit more narrow. So I'm going to quilt that at 5 inches tall. So let's go ahead and set this up in the software so you can see how to design your shorter border. So let's start over just so you know how to get to the right screen. We're going to click on Pantograph. And this is the screen that we end up with. And I've already set my new safe area, and it's pretty big. It's 57 by 13. So I'm going to change that total width to 40.25. That's 40¼ And then I'm going to change my total height to 5. So that is the space I want to work in. Now I can click Select Pattern here or Select Pattern up here. And I'm going to look for that pattern A again. Open it. And I'm going to add more patterns until I like the look of it. And I like 5. I think that looks really nice. So now we're going to hit Place a Single Pattern. And again, we're going to use the 2-point method to place this. I have already marked the spot on my quilt. And remember, I measured this full width of the border, and that's 6.5 inches. I measured down from the top 3 1/4, made a mark. That is where I'm going to line up my needle, right on that edge between the green and the orange, and right on that mark. And that's where I'm going to hit that node. So that's my start point. Now we're going to wheel it all the way over to the other side. And again, I'm going to line this up really nicely. 3 1/4 inches from the top and bottom. And that looks good. And I hit my end point. So that looks great. Now I'm going to click on Show Grid and Show Pattern Size. Make sure that this is looking nice and straight across, because that would tell me if I'm seeing that this is veering within the software itself, then that would be telling me that maybe my border isn't installed straight. But now that I have the grid in place and I can see that grid in relation to my design and how I placed it on the quilt, this looks really nice and straight. I see that it's running along that grid line. I can zoom in using that button, and I think this looks great. So it's ready to stitch. So I just finished stitching out my shorter border, and that is it for our Basket Weave with QCT quilt along. I have learned so much in this process about placing designs, about designing with these continuous patterns, and about how to keep things straight and square and continuous within the frame. I know that there is so much more to play with when it comes to computerized quilting, and I can't wait to dive in and continue sharing new ideas with you. Until next time, let's go quilt!